Welcome, everyone. We are just going to give folks a minute or so to join us and gather in the room, and then we will go ahead and get started. So just sit tight for a few more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Tracy. My name is, good afternoon and welcome to today's Public Service Loan Forgiveness webinar. My name is Bill Moses. I'm the Managing Director of the Kresge Foundation's Education Program. I've worked my entire career in government in the nonprofit sector, but started out with $26,000 in undergraduate student loans and even more graduate loans. My spouse, a first-generation student of color and now a legal aid attorney, reminded me this morning she accrued close to $150,000 in student loans. Like all of you, I entered the nonprofit sector to make the world a better place, but it hasn't always been easy. My debt made it hard to make ends meet, and there were many times when I was tempted to drop out of school or change careers. College is definitely worth it, even if you borrow, but the increasing cost of college is making it harder for people to enter and stay in careers like ours. This is especially true if you don't come from wealth. 15 years ago, the Congress recognized that the cost of college was dissuading people from entering careers, professions like nursing, teaching, the arts, higher education, and the whole range of nonprofit and government work. When President Bush signed the College Cost Reduction and Access Act of 2007, he and the Congress created a framework to provide relief to workers in our sector through public service loan forgiveness. Unfortunately, as many of you know, despite the promise made in 2007, actually securing PSLF has been difficult. Some would say nearly impossible. But under the leadership of President Biden, Secretary Cardona, and today's speaker, we have a temporary waiver that has greatly eased the process of obtaining PSLF and keeping that promise made to so many of you. Our speaker, Ashley Harrington, is an attorney and a senior advisor to the Chief Operating Officer at the Department of Education's Office of Federal Student Aid, FSA. She advises the COO on policy implementation, operations, and external communications related to the $1.6 trillion federal student loan portfolio. Before joining FSA, Ashley served as Federal Advocacy Director and Senior Policy Counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending, where she led its federal advocacy efforts, helping to shape fair lending and consumer protection reforms to address racial wealth disparities. She's also worked at one of our oldest grantees, UNCF, and in the New York State Governor's Office. We'll start today with a presentation by Ashley, followed by comments from our moderator, Tracy Pearson, the Kresge Education Team's Communications Officer, about her experience with PSLF. Tracy will then switch to moderated Q&A for about 20 minutes. We'll then turn to our colleague, Heather Hacker, of Kresge's Talent and Human Resources Department, who will outline the process we've developed at Kresge to support our staff to prepare for PSLF. Finally, I'll close us out. There are just a few housekeeping items we want to cover before we get started. First, the session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Kresge Foundation's YouTube page upon conclusion of the session. At the end of the formal presentation remarks, we will open up the session for questions to Ashley. We ask that questions focus on the PSLF program and are general in nature, and you could ask them in that Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom page. And you can do so as soon as you have a question. Otherwise, we will be looking to hear great ideas and questions from all of you. And I'd now like to turn over the microphone to our guest, Ashley Harrington. Thank you, and thank you for joining us today.
Bill, and thank you to you and your team for putting this together, for all of your support of our efforts, and all of you are doing to support student loan borrowers across this country. Really excited to join this today and share with all of you a lot of information, so apologies in advance. For those of you who are even a little bit familiar with PSLF, you may know that it is a slightly complicated program. And we have done a lot to alleviate some of those complications, and we're going to talk about that, but it is still a lot of information that we have to get through, and that we hope that you'll be able to take in and ask questions at the end. So we're going to jump right in. What we're going to talk about today is PSLF, but it's a part of the Biden-Harris administration's efforts at providing targeted student loan relief and really making our student loan system work better so that people can better manage their loans and get a return on their investment in higher education. And to date, even before the announcement of 2 weeks ago about one-time debt relief, we have approved nearly $34 billion in debt cancellation for almost 1.7 million borrowers. That was already more than any administration ever. And that includes over $10 billion for more than 175,000 public servants through improvements to PSLF that we're going to talk about today. Next slide. And so I said that was before the announcement of 2 weeks ago. So just want to flag that absolutely, in case you haven't heard, 2 weeks ago, President Biden announced that we are doing one-time debt relief for borrowers of up to $20,000 if you received a Pell Grant in college, up to $10,000 if you didn't receive a Pell Grant. It's for low and middle income borrowers, so borrowers who make less than $125,000 as a single person or less than $250,000 as a married household. These are the borrowers that are eligible for this one-time relief. That the application for that is going to be available in October, and we're really excited to expand on all the things we're already doing and also provide this relief. This has the ability to cancel the debt, eliminate totally the debt for 20 million borrowers. The other 23 million federal borrowers are going to have an easier burden to manage going forward. We've extended the payment pause through the end of December so that borrowers have more time to get prepared for payments to restart, and so they can get on track with their payments and stay on track come January. We also announced a proposal for a new income-based repayment plan that will enable borrowers to have more manageable payments, save money over time, and really be able to have student loans that are less burdensome. So we're really excited about all of this. You can find more about this at studentaid.gov/debt relief. We just added some new FAQs there if you want to check those out. But again, that application will be available in October. And while this is really great, we want folks to know that you can still do both. We don't want people to miss out on PSLF and the limited waiver that we're going to talk about. You can apply for both. We will manage all of that, but you don't want to miss out on any of these opportunities to get the relief that you have earned and that you deserve. Next slide. So we're going to talk about the PSLF waiver. The debt relief is very exciting, but the PSLF waiver is also exciting. I mentioned the 175,000 borrowers who have gotten over $10 billion in forgiveness. Before this, right? In January of this year, only 7,000 only 7,000 borrowers had gotten forgiveness under PSLF. In less than a year, we have increased that to 175,000 borrowers. That is huge. And even for borrowers who are not at 120, who are not at the 10 years for PSLF, we have brought another 1.1 million borrowers closer to forgiveness. The average borrower has picked up a year's worth of additional credit. That's 12 additional months towards the required 120 for PSLF. So this waiver, these temporary time-limited changes are for everybody, not just for people who have been in repayment for a certain amount of time, not just for people who have been in public service for a certain amount of time. Everyone can benefit from this if they're in public service and have student loans, and we want everyone to take advantage of this opportunity. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about the basics of PSLF. I think it's important to start there because I did mention that these are time-limited changes. And so on October 31, these rules turn to a pumpkin and we go back to normal rules. We're also going to talk about the limited PSLF waiver. Those are the time-limited changes that have gotten so many borrowers forgiveness or closer to forgiveness. We'll talk a little bit about the PSLF help tool, which is what you want to use to apply for PSLF. And then we'll spend some time on resources, and then I will turn it back over, and then we'll have some time for questions. Next slide. So PSL, you're really good at this, Tracy, by the way. Like, you anticipate when I'm going to say next slide before I say next slide. And I love that. That's never happened to me before. And I'm loving it. So thank you. So the PSLF program forgives the remaining balance on federal direct loans after a borrower has made 120 qualifying monthly payments under a qualifying repayment plan while working full-time for a qualifying employer. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is just a visual that lays out what that looks like, right? 120 qualifying payments on direct loans while working for a qualifying employer. When you're applying for and receiving actual PSLF forgiveness, this is normal PSLF rules. And in the end, whatever's left over is forgiven and it's not taxable income. So if you were listening closely, you heard me say qualifying multiple times. So we like to say you had to have the right loan with the right repayment with the right job. And we're going to dig into each of those pieces separately. Let's start with the right loan. Under normal PSLF rules, for it to be an eligible loan, it had to be a direct loan. And that does include consolidation loans and Parent Plus loans. It doesn't include something called FFEL program loans. That's Federal Family Education Loans. These are loans that were originated by private lenders like Sallie Mae or Wells Fargo, but guaranteed by the federal government. Doesn't include Perkins loans. These are loans that were originated by institutions of higher education and guaranteed by the federal government. And it doesn't include any other federal or private student loan. It's what's in, sorry, go back one. And what's interesting is that, back when Congress did the CCRA and created PSLF in October 2007, as Bill laid out, the FEL program was actually the bigger program. There were actually more FEL borrowers than direct loan borrowers. And yet these borrowers weren't automatically included in PSLF. Now, these borrowers, FEL borrowers, Perkins borrowers, have always been able to consolidate into direct loan programs. They could get direct loans. But if they did, they didn't get credit for any of that time prior to that. Even if they were in public service and repayment, none of that counted towards their 120. Even if a borrower had direct loans and consolidated, for whatever reason, they would start at zero on that new consolidation loan. So that's one of the issues for eligible loan types. Next slide. So that's the right loan, the right repayment. How do you make a payment count towards the 120? Has to be on time. Has to be made on a standard plan or any income-driven repayment plan. And you may hear me say IDR for income-driven repayment or IBR for income-based repayment interchangeably. These are just the plans based on borrower's income. It has to be for at least the amount due, and they can be non-consecutive. So we get a lot of questions about, what if I worked and then left that field, went back to school, started a family, or went to another career? Doesn't matter. I like to say, get your 120 how you can. It can take you exactly 10 years to get to 120. It can take you 15 years. It can take you 20 years. However long it takes you to get to 120, that's your path, but that is your 120. So it can't be more than 15 days late, can't be made on a graduated, extended, or alternative repayment plan, can't be for less than the amount due, and it can't be made when not required. So if you're in school and your loans are deferred, or you're in that grace period and you make a payment, those payments don't count. You can make multiple payments in 1 month and have that be counted as long as it adds up to the amount due and it's paid within 15 days of the due date. We also do accept lump sum payments, but it's limited to 12 months of payments or until your IDR recertification date, because you do have to recertify your income every year for IDR. And even if a borrower does do the lump sum, it doesn't mean they get forgiven any sooner, because you still have to work those corresponding months with the qualifying employer. Next slide. So a quick note on Parent Plus loans, because we also get a lot of questions about that. And I did mention that they do count for PSLF, and it is based on the parent's employment, not the student's, because it's the parent's loan. So Parent Plus loans are not excluded from PSLF, but they are excluded from some income-based repayment plans. And so you really want to be on an income-based repayment plan to get the most out of PSLF, because the standard plan for federal student loans is a 10-year fully amortizing plan. So if you're on that and you get to 10 years, you have nothing left to forgive. So you want to be on IDR. In order for a Parent Plus borrower to get on IDR, they have to consolidate. Then once they have a direct consolidation loan with an underlying Parent Plus loan, they are able to access just one of the IDR plans, ICR, income contingent repayment, gotta love the acronyms, which is the least generous of the IDR plans. So while it is an income-based plan, parents could make lower payments on a graduated or extended plan. So we do encourage parents to use our loan simulator and really game out what's the best for them in the short and long term for their own situation. We can go to the next slide. So we talked about the right loan, we talked about the right repayment. Now we're going to talk about the right job. The good news is I'm pretty sure that most folks on here are working for or affiliated with eligible employers. Yay. So we define public service employment as full-time, 30 hours a week or the equivalent for a government entity that's federal, state, local, tribal, and it does include military, all 501c3 nonprofits, and some other nonprofits if they provide a qualifying public service. So that's things like emergency management, public health, early childhood education, library sciences, things like that. It does not include part-time work if it doesn't add up to full-time. Doesn't include volunteer work, so if they're not getting paid, doesn't count. Doesn't include any for-profit entities, no matter what that entity does. Doesn't include labor unions, and doesn't include partisan political organizations. So we like to say it's about the employer, it's not about the job. We're never asking a borrower, what's your title? What do you do with this organization? We don't care. We just want to know who pays you, who's on your W-2, who's on your pay stub. And is it a federal, state, local, or tribal government entity? Is it a 501c3 nonprofit, or is it another nonprofit that provides one of those qualifying public services? And as long as it is, that counts. You can even have multiple part-time jobs and have that add up to full-time employment. So if I work 15 hours a week at Department of Ed and 15 hours a week at the Kresge Foundation, that's 30 hours a week and I'm in full-time public service. We can go to the next slide. So there's also something called temporary expanded PSLF, not to be confused with the limited PSLF waiver that we're going to talk about next. Please don't confuse those. This is something that was also created by Congress and it's through appropriations, and it's just for borrowers who couldn't get their loans forgiven because they had made some of their payments on the wrong repayment plan. So this is for borrowers who had made some payments on extended or graduated plan and offered them a way to get forgiveness. Next slide. So I do want to flag, because I did mention earlier that we extended the payment pause through the end of December. Borrowers who have still remained and have been able to keep their jobs in public service for the pandemic can get credit for every single one of these months towards their 120. Even though we have not been required to make a payment since March of 2020, if you have been able to keep your job in public service for any or all, for all of that time, or even some part of that time, for every single one of those months, you can get credit towards that for the 120. And so if you've been employed this entire time, you can get 30 plus months towards your 120, and that's more than a fourth of the way towards forgiveness for PSLF. I like to say it multiple times because nobody ever believes me the first time I say it. You can get credit for every single one of these months towards PSLF. So now we're going to talk about the limited PSLF waiver. My slide still says new updates, but it feels like they're not new anymore because we're coming up on the year anniversary when it ends. So I should probably change that at some point. But we announced this last October, and these are time limited changes to PSLF rules. Under these rules, borrowers can get credit for past periods of repayment that normally don't qualify for PSLF. So you can get credit for any prior period of repayment, no matter the loan program, the repayment plan, whether you made a payment in full, or made it on time. So basically what I'm asking you to do is think about everything I just said and forget about like 80% of it until October 31st. Because right now, we don't care what repayment plan you're on. I said standard or IDR. Under the waiver, we don't care. We don't care what repayment plan you're on. You could have been on any old repayment plan. We literally don't care. You can get credit for time on Perkins or Fell loans, right? And we talked about how normally you consolidate, you start at zero. Under the waiver, you don't start at zero. Even if you've already consolidated, you can now get credit for the time prior to consolidation. So we're not looking at your loan program, your repayment plan. We don't care if you missed a payment, if the payment was like $1 short, if it was late, we're not looking at any of that. We just want to know if you were in something we call active repayment status, which we define very generously. And we're even counting some periods of deferment and forbearance. So we'll talk about that later. So basically, as long as you weren't in default, as long as you weren't in school or your grace period, you can get credit for these months. You still need qualifying employment. We didn't change anything about what counts as qualifying employment, but these other rules are the game changer, right? And so this is for people who have direct loans, those who consolidate to the direct loan program by 1031, and those who have already consolidated. So to put it all in perspective again, the big piece is payments made prior to consolidation are now eligible. So if you have a direct consolidation loan, you can, and it was previously a Fell or a Perkins or even a direct loan, you can now get credit for the time prior to consolidation. If you still have Fell or Perkins loans, you can consolidate now and get credit for the time prior to consolidation. We're not looking at the repayment plan. We literally don't care. We don't care if you missed the payment. We don't care about any of that. We're not looking at any of those pieces under the waiver. And so it's not a different application. It's the same PSLF application you've already done. It's just that if you apply now under the waiver, we look at your account based on these rules instead of the old rules. And you really want your account looked at under the new rules, because even if you just get 5 additional payments, that's 5 fewer months that you have to be burdened by your student loans down the road. So the employment requirements still apply. Must have been employed full-time for a qualifying employer for every period of repayment that you're trying to get credit for. And so borrowers have to act now. We are trying to encourage every single borrower to take advantage of this. And to do that, you want to consolidate if you still have non-direct loans, and you got to get a PSLF form in by October 31st. And even though it's September, there is still plenty of time, I promise you, but you don't want to wait. Go ahead and get your stuff in. Take advantage of this opportunity now. Next slide. Oh, there you are. You're already there. So you might fall into one of 3 borrower groups. You might only have direct loans. If you only have direct loans, you don't have to worry about consolidating. The only reason you would worry about consolidating if you only have direct loans is if you have some loans that have been in repayment longer than others and you were in public service. So say you went to undergrad, took out loans, went and worked at a nonprofit, then went back to school, got some more loans, and then went back into public service. And so your undergrad loans have been in repayment longer. Under the waiver, if you consolidate those undergrad loans and those grad loans, the entire consolidation loan would get all of the credit based on those undergrad loans as well. And so you could potentially get your grad loans forgiven sooner with your undergrad loans. So that's the only reason you would think about consolidating if you only have direct loans. If your loans are all pretty much the same age of repayment and you only have direct loans, you don't have to worry about that. You just want to get your PSLF form in by October 31st. If you've previously consolidated into the direct loan program, you want to submit forms for the time prior to consolidation. And if you still have Feller Perkins loans, you have the most to do because you got to consolidate and get that form in, and you want to do that by the deadline. Next slide. So a quick note about Parent Plus loans, because we talked about how they are eligible for PSLF. Unfortunately, they're not eligible for additional credits under the waiver. So we talked about how a lot of Parent Plus borrowers are going to have direct consolidation loans with underlying Parent Plus. And under the waiver, people can get credit pre-consolidation. If you only have regular old Parent Plus under your direct consolidation loan, you're not going to get any additional credit for the time in which it's a regular old Parent Plus, if that's all that's under there. You could get additional time for the time after consolidation if you missed a payment or you were on the wrong repayment plan or something like that, but not for the time prior to consolidation with a regular old Parent Plus. If you have a direct consolidation loan that has underlying Parent Plus and your own student loan, so you consolidate them all together, that loan could get additional credit based on the student loan, just not based on the Parent Plus loan. So we get a lot of questions about how a borrower knows what type of loan they have, right? Where do I don't know. I remember a Stafford, I remember unsubsidized, I remember subsidized. I don't know anything about a failed direct or Perkins. So you want to go to your studentaid.gov account. If you don't have a studentaid.gov account, you want to get one. That's the best place to go to get information about your loans. It's where you're going to go to apply for PSLF, to apply for one-time debt relief, to apply for income-based repayment, to do your consolidation. I mean, it's just got everything there. So you want to have a studentaid.gov account. But when you log in, you'll be able to see your age summary. You'll be able to scroll down to your loan breakdown section and you'll see a list of the loans you took out. And you'll be able to click through and you'll see a detailed name of each loan. And each loan will literally say direct or FFEL or Perkins. So you can see it in the title. And if you see loans that don't say direct, that's your cue to know I have some loans that are not direct. And if I want to take advantage of the waiver, I'm going to have to consolidate. But it'll say it right there in the title and you won't have to wonder anymore what type of loans you have. So recap, take advantage of the waiver. You want to confirm your employer is qualified, and we're going to talk about how to do that in just a couple of minutes. You want to consolidate your loans if you need to, and you want to get that PSLF form in by October 31st of this year. So I do want to note a couple things about consolidation because there are things that happen, but I will say from my perspective, there's never been a better time to consolidate. There have been issues with consolidation over the years. You started at 0 for PSLF. You started at 0 for income-based repayment forgiveness, which offers forgiveness after 20 or 25 years. But we took that away with the waiver and something called the IDR adjustment that I'm going to talk about next. So we've taken away the biggest issues with consolidation, the things that have that are like the biggest stings, right? We've taken those away. There are still things that happen, but the biggest issues with consolidation have been accounted for, and so you don't have to worry about those anymore. But when you consolidate, you have a new loan. And so your monthly payment could change. It could go down, but it also could go up. And that's because if you consolidate and you no longer have a partial financial hardship, you could lose access to some of the IDR plans that are more affordable. So you do want to use our loan simulator, and that is something you might want to think about if this is your situation. If you have unpaid interest or fees, they're going to get capitalized, and so your principal balance will go up. And your new loan will generally have a new interest rate that's basically a weighted average of the interest rates of the loans. Now, if you're working towards PSLF, you probably don't care about a lot of this because you're just trying to get to 120, and that just means more stuff's going to get forgiven at the end. So you probably don't care, but I do want to flag these for folks. And I'll just note that you don't have to consolidate all of your student loans. You can consolidate 1 loan, 5 loans, 6 loans. It's up to you. But once you do that and they're dispersed, you can't undo it. So I just mentioned something called the IDR payment count adjustment and told you that it took another sting out of consolidation because you no longer start at 0. It does a couple of other things. Well, it does a lot of things, but I'm going to focus on a few. So under this adjustment, we were trying to address this issue with borrowers who were steered into long-term forbearances by their servicers. And so we're giving borrowers credit towards IDR, and if they can certify employment towards PSLF, if they were steered into a long-term forbearance, which we define as 12 or more months consecutive or 36 or more months cumulative. We're also giving credit for months spent in deferment prior to 2013, as long as it wasn't an in-school deferment. and for economic hardship deferments after January 1st, 2013. Now, we announced this in April, but we got a lot going on. So we're not going to implement this till later this year or next year. So that's going to take time. And we're going to do this automatically where possible. But you just want to make sure that you have your PSLF employment certified for these periods so that when we do that adjustment, you can get your credit. So we can go to the next slide. So just a recap of how to think about deferments, forbearance, and the PSLF waiver, because we talked about the active repayment thing. So what automatically counts? The long-term forbearances that we just talked about. So 12 or more months consecutive, 36 or more months cumulative, deferments prior to 2013, as long as it wasn't in school. Economic hardship deferments count. Some military-related forbearances and deferments count. And if you're a borrower who was steered into a shorter-term forbearance, while it's not automatic, you can submit a complaint to your servicer and potentially get credit for that as well. And these are all periods, but you still have to have employment. For every single period you want to get credit for, you have to have that qualifying PSLF employment. So I do want to flag a couple of things about what to expect when you're expecting, because we get a lot of questions about how long is this going to take? Do I even have enough time to apply by 1031? What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? So we want to reassure borrowers of a couple of things. First, we just put up some new FAQs today that really lays out what counts as meeting the deadline. And you can meet the deadline for the waiver by using our help tool to generate a form, whether it generates an actual form for signature or it creates a case for our employer team, which I'll talk about next. Even if you don't actually get it to MOHELA, if you use our help tool and it's later approved, that counts for the waiver. You just have to get that consolidation application started. So consolidation can take 30 to 60 days. We know that. Just get it in there, make sure it's done. And this is not me telling you to wait till October 31st at 11 p.m. Please don't do that. Just go ahead and get it done. So you don't have to worry about it. But we want to make sure that borrowers are not held harmless for anything that is a delay on our part. So you just want to do everything you need to do. Get your forms in, get your consolidation done, do your part. The rest is on us. Even if we process something after October 31, even if we process it in like January, as long as you've gotten it in by the deadline and you've met the criteria that we've laid out, you will get your credit under the waiver. You don't have to worry about that. Do your part, leave the rest to us. So that's one piece. If you're worried, you submitted stuff, you haven't heard anything back, it can take a while right now, because not only do we have an unprecedented number of applications because of this waiver, which we love. We want so many borrowers to get advantage of this. We're also transitioning servicers. As of July 1, the PSLF servicer is a company called MOHELA. You may have previously heard of a company called Fed Loan Servicing, or FIA, who was the previous servicer. They're no longer the servicer. So everyone's getting moved to MOHELA. And so don't worry about that. That's a normal part of the process. I was transferred like a month ago. My payment count didn't change. My terms don't change. None of that happens. You're going to be okay. But all of this just means we got a lot going on, and a couple other things that we talked about earlier as well. So things are going to take a little bit longer, but remember, you do your part, leave the rest to us. So we can go to the next slide. So that's the basics of the waiver. Now we're going to talk about how you apply for PSLF. And I want to flag again, it's not a separate application. It's the same PSLF form that we've been using for years. It's the same help tool you've always used. It just means that if you apply now, you get the waiver treatment instead of the normal PSLF treatment. So before we get to the help tool, we also announced in July this new standalone employer tool. It's hooked up to the same database as our help tool, but it's publicly available. So you don't have to have a studentaid.gov account. You don't have to log in. You can use it and you can see what's in our database for employers. That's publicly available now. We're really excited. Next slide. But we really want people to use our help tool to generate the form, and the form looks like this. This is the physical form. So while you can print it out and fill it out, we really encourage you to use the help tool, because one, it helps us process faster, but two, if you use our help tool, that helps ensure that you're meeting the requirements of the waiver, because as I just laid out, if you use our help tool and you generate a form, you can get counted under the waiver as long as your form is later approved, even if it's approved a few months later, it's submitted months later. Use our help tool, right? So next slide. So you can find our help tool at studentaid.gov/PSLF. That's what it looks like. You'll have to log into your studentaid.gov account. And the first thing it's going to ask you for is something called an EIN. We go next slide. Employer identification number. I can't stress enough that you're going to need this EIN. And you're going to need the EIN for every single employer you want to get credit for. Not right now, right? To get the waiver, you just need to get at least one form in. But for whenever you want to get the credit, right, you're going to have that EIN. And you can find it on your W-2 in box B. Next slide. We have it highlighted right there in red. You can find it on your pay stub, or you can ask your HR department directly. But you're going to need that EIN to use our help tool, because that's how you're going to search. We don't ask you for the name first. We ask you for that EIN. We can go to the next slide. And so once you do that, a couple of things could happen that I will flag. So first, you could put in the EIN, and well, before I say that, I'll say that our help tool is not perfect. It does not have every single qualifying employer that exists. It does not have every single employer in general that exists. It's not a perfect system. And so some folks are going to put in things and they're going to get something like likely ineligible, which just means undetermined, meaning we don't know, or ineligible, which means we do know what it is, but we think it doesn't qualify. And if you get one of those, do not freak out, right? As long as you still believe and you know that if it's likely ineligible, it's definitely one of the qualifying employers. If it's ineligible, that we're wrong and it is a qualifying employer, and you can submit that documentation for the ineligible ones, this is going to create a case. So if it doesn't say eligible right away, it's going to create a case for us. So you're not going to get a form at the end. You should still continue with the tool. But again, as long as that case results in that employer getting approved later, you still are going to be deemed to have met the waiver, because we're not going to hold you responsible for the fact that our system is not perfect and it's never going to be perfect. So don't freak out if you get a result that doesn't make sense to you. Still continue with the tool, get that in, and you will be deemed to have met the waiver. Or you could put in eligible, or you could put in an EIN and multiple things could pop up, because state and federal government agencies often share EINs. Some other folks share EINs, and that's okay too. Just make sure you're picking the one that matches most closely with where you work. So you can put in multiple employers at a time. You'll click continue, you go to loan tips. It'll just give you some information about loan consolidation and the COVID waiver. And you go to next slide. Then it'll ask you application details. And they're basically asking you, do you have 120 payments? Yes or no. Now, you might think you have 120 payments because you watched this whole presentation, you read the entire waiver page, and you are convinced that you have 120 plus payments. That could be true. But if our system doesn't yet think you have 120 payments because you haven't consolidated yet, or we haven't done your deferments yet, you still got to put no. Because if you try to put yes, it's not going to let you move forward. So it doesn't matter. We're still going to look at it, but you have to put whatever matches up with what our system thinks in order to move forward. Next slide. So then it's going to show your personal information. You've logged into your studentaid.gov account. So all this is going to be pre-populated, but you can change it if you need to. Next slide. Then you're going to review everything, make sure it looks right, check it all. You're going to click save. And at this point, if you had eligible employers, you're going to get a form like the one I showed you a few slides ago that's going to be all filled out. If you had employers that were ineligible or likely ineligible, you're not going to get a form right now. It's creating a case for our employer adjudication team, and they're going to look at it. And as long as they later approve it, you're good under the waiver. But if you did get it done, you're going to get a form. And now for folks who have eligible employers, you're going to be able to download it. And you're going to have to mail it or fax it to MOHELA if they're not your servicer. And if they are your servicer, you can upload it directly online. And so to do that, you're going to have to sign it, and you're going to have to get it signed by each employer. So if you put in multiple employers, you're going to get multiple forms. Each one will have to be signed. Next slide. So you want to make sure you're following this. Oh, sorry. I think one. Sorry, Tracy. You want to make sure you're following our signature rules, because we are very picky about what we accept. You can do a hand-drawn signature using your signature pad with your mouse or your finger. That's fine. You can do one that is a scanned photo of a signature that was hand-drawn on paper. You can do it the regular way where you literally print it out, sign it with an ink pen, all of that. All of those works, and this is the rule. All of those work, and this is the rule for both you and your employer. But you cannot use like a cursive font. Like you can't just find a cursive font and type it out. Doesn't work. You can't use digital certificate-based signatures like DocuSign. Can't use those. So you just want to make sure that you're following your signature rules, because you would hate to have your form sent back on the technicality. Believe me, back when I was uninformed, I had mine sent back, and it can be very frustrating. Next slide. So then once you do that, if you raise your hand for PSLF, you get to then track your payment counts on the servicer website. If you're like me, you like to sit there and watch it go up so you can feel like you're getting closer to 120. And you'll be able to see right there which payments are ineligible or eligible and why, which ones are qualifying. You'll be able to track it and make sure everything looks right. Next slide. And it'll look like something like this on FedLoan. I just don't have the MOHELA picture yet, but it'll look like something similar. Then you'll also be able to see it, next slide, on studentaid.gov. And so right there where the orange arrow is, you can see it. But I'll also point out that right there at the top, as I told you, it says loan type and it says direct graduate plus. So right away, you know this is a direct loan. Remember I told you it's in the title? It'll be right there. You'll be able to see it. And that's why studentaid.gov is a great place to go. Okay, so this is just the best place to go for more information about the waiver, detailed FAQs, studentaid.gov/PSLF waiver. For the help tool, studentaid.gov/PSLF. You're going to submit those forms to Mohila. And for general information about PSLF, studentaid.gov/public service. These are some federal student aid tools and resources. If you have questions about like your general account questions, you can call our contact center or your own servicer. If you have PSLF specific questions, you can call Mohila because they're the PSLF servicer. Okay, I think I did that pretty fast. Sorry, I could talk really fast sometimes, but I'm going to turn it back over to the Kresge team, and then we'll take some questions in a bit.
All right, before we take questions, thank you, Ashley, so much for your time and this information, for creating this opportunity for our colleagues at Kresge, for bringing in the Department of Education. I just want to say that as someone who admittedly heard about the public service loan forgiveness program in the past, there was a sense of dread in having to apply and potentially getting denied. Also going through all of the hurdles of the application, just because you think about things that have to do with the federal government and you think, oh my goodness, headaches and mountains of paperwork. Like so many others, I had heard how difficult it was, but I just want to offer that going through the process of accessing and completing the form on the federal student ed website, it was not that difficult. I will offer to you all, this is a website that I hadn't previously logged into in 10 years. So you do have to go back and find your username, find your password, just some tips and tricks in terms of when you go and hit recover, don't hit it twice because you have to wait a little while for it to get into your inbox. Do not abandon the task. Maybe get up, go get yourself a beverage or something, but don't abandon the task. Make sure that you do have all of those tax documents that you need, check stubs, everything, so that you can actually do it once you do get the information to log in, and then save it as a PDF and get it signed. That process will look a little bit different company to company. I know my husband works for the city of Detroit. His HR department signs it and they send it. Kresge's process looks a little bit different. Everybody's process will look a little bit different. And I believe that someone from the Kresge Foundation, our HR department, will be on a little bit later to speak about that. But I do just want to offer that bit of feedback. Make sure you definitely have all of your documents with you when you go to start the process, so you don't have to go get up, go look at a tax document from 12 years ago. Because if you're anything like me, you will abandon the process. And we only have a little bit of time to get this done. So with that, I think we can start to answer some of the questions that we have in the chat function. Again, please use the chat function for your questions. We'll monitor please use the Q&A, not the chat. Folks, use the chat, but don't use the chat. Use the Q&A function so that we can make sure we see them there. So let's see where we start. Does the income requirement apply to you based on your 2021 income taxes?
So the income limits are only for the one-time debt relief, right? So not for PSLF. PSLF doesn't have income limits. But for the one-time debt relief, it's based on your 2020 or your 2021 taxes, and it's based on the AGI.
Okay. Will the Biden student forgiveness only apply for undergraduate loans or just federal loans, meaning including graduate school?
The one-time debt relief is for all federal student loans. So I like to think of it as if your loans were part of the payment pause, it can apply to you. It applies to you.
Okay. What if someone who has defaulted at one point, what about someone who has defaulted at one point? Can I still apply for loan forgiveness? They may have tried in the past, but they want to know that they still have that opportunity to apply for the forgiveness program.
For PSLF?
For PSLF.
Yes. So you wouldn't get credit for time when you were actually in default, right? But you can get credit for all the time, all the way up until default, all of that. So you wouldn't, so that time wouldn't get done. If you're still in default, you can't actually apply for forgiveness until you get out of default. But luckily we have a new Fresh Start initiative where we're bringing folks out of default. Go to studentaid.gov/fresh start and take a look at that. But so basically, yes, you just wouldn't get it for those periods.
Okay.
And Tracy, I'll just add, for most folks, if your question is going to start with, should I apply? Like 9.8 times out of 10, I'm gonna say yes. Because there's really no reason not to apply and take advantage of this. All that can happen is you don't get any additional payments or some, right? Like there's like, it is so imperative that people get the maximum amount of credit because you, even if you just get 2 additional months, that could help. So I'm pretty much gonna say apply, just so we're clear.
Okay. We're doing these sort of rapid fire so I can get to as many questions as possible, Ashley. Is it true that some borrowers that receive full forgiveness under PSLF limited waiver may receive a refund of some previous payments made?
Yes, some borrowers are getting refunds. So if we apply the waiver to your account and it turns out that you made more than 120 payments on a direct loan, so not a FFEL loan, not a Perkins loan, it has to be a direct loan, you will get the payments made in excess of 120 back. So yes, people are absolutely getting refunds, and that's very exciting.
Okay. I believe that answered several questions. What if the nonprofit was physically sponsored or has since dissolved?
So we get that question too. You absolutely want to try to get a signature. That's your holy grail. We really want people to try to get signed forms as much as possible. But if you absolutely cannot get a form because that nonprofit closed or because you're asking for them for records from like 2008, they only keep records from like 2015 on, right? Then you can submit your W-2 or pay stubs or deposit records for those months, but you are going to have to submit something that shows you were employed by that employer.
Okay. Does previous employment with a nonprofit count towards this? So a previous, like you had a job that's different from the job you may have had now, it's previous employment, okay?
You can get credit for any employment after October 2007 because that's when PSLF was created. If you had a loan. If you didn't have a loan yet, you can't get any credit. But as long as you had a loan, then you can get credit.
Okay. What if one of the qualifying employers no longer exists or does not respond to requests for a signature on our paperwork? That's a good question.
So that goes back to if you absolutely can't get a signature, you can use that W-2 or your pay stubs or deposit records, and you can just attach those directly to your form. There'll be a place where you check there, I can't get a signature, and you'll send it all to Mohila.
Okay. How often do you need to certify employment?
So we think best practice is every year or every time you change jobs, because that way you don't have to worry about trying to go back and get some employer to sign something from 10 years ago. Just go ahead and do it now so you don't have to worry about it every year or every time you change jobs. You don't have to do this, but that's the best practice.
Okay. Should I include all periods of time that I worked for a 501c3, even if I'm unsure if I make qualifying payments during those periods?
Absolutely. Yep. You got it. Yep.
See, start to see the pattern. What if my income changed from 2021 to 2022? I believe they are speaking about the forgiveness portion. Can I still apply for loan for, forgiveness?
Yes, it's going to be about your income in 2020 or 2021. That's it.
Okay. Let's see. And I apologize, guys. We can't get into questions that are too personal. We're really trying to keep it broad questions. If you do have questions, we will share the information either in the chat or in the email that gets sent to you guys after the webinar on where you can go for the updated FAQs, as well as who you can contact, whether that's your private servicer or the federal Department of Ed. Let's see. Okay, we answered this, but I will do it one more time because repetition. Do I need to consolidate my undergrad and grad loans before applying for the waiver if I want the credit on my undergrad payments?
Say that one more time.
Do I need to consolidate my undergrad and grad loans, before applying for the waiver if I want the credit on my undergraduate payments? So
go ahead. You do it all, right? Like you don't want to wait for the consolidation to go through because that's going to take 60 days at least. So do your consolidation and submit your form because you don't want to miss out on the deadlines. But like as long as you do that before 1031, you're fine. The only issue you could have is if you already have direct loans and we process the PSLF form and it turns out you already had 10 years. And so like what we've had, like some folks are getting, because they didn't know the consolidation goes through later, their first loan's getting forgiven and then there's nothing else. So then they got to keep going paying. But if you're not worried about that, because you're not at 120, then just do everything.
Okay.
If that answers the question.
Are private loans eligible for the PSLF program?
No.
I downloaded my application form, but none of my employers were listed on the help tool.
So remember, you may have to input things manually if they're not in there, or they may say likely ineligible or ineligible. That's just our system's not perfect. Just go ahead and finish the tool. It'll create a case for us. As long as we later approve it, you're going to be okay.
Okay. Can you speak a little bit about taxing student loan forgiveness? Well, specifically states that have either insinuated they might tax student loan forgiveness, or what the department's stance on that is.
Well, I mean, so it's not PSLF is not taxable under statute. The other loan forgiveness programs are not taxable now that under the American Rescue Plan for 5 years. So they're not taxable from the federal level. There are a few states who do taxing loan benefits and said they're planning to do that. So that is that state's decision. But on our end, it's not taxable.
Okay. Are there any downsides to consolidating if you aren't guaranteed public service loan forgiveness?
So I think the only downsides are be right that your payment could change and it could go up if you lose access to IDR plans. Your interest rate could go up. So all of those things, but the biggest downsides were starting at zero for IDR and for PSLF. We've taken that away. So the biggest downsides have been taken away. So there's never been a better time to consolidate is what I'll say.
Okay. Let's scroll down a little bit. Do the 120 payments have to occur while I was employed by a nonprofit, or are any 120 payments accepted?
No, for whatever period of repayment that you're trying to get credit for, it has to match up with qualifying employment. It has to be the same periods.
Okay. Are PLUS loans qualified for the, I guess I should have offered this also. If we could try to keep the questions, because as Ashley stated, the forgiveness and the public service loan program, they're separate programs. So I think it would be really helpful if we could just sort of keep the questions focused on the public service loan forgiveness portion, just to keep the lines clear for those who might have questions that they still have. What if I have both direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans and have been working in a nonprofit? Can I apply for public service loan forgiveness?
Yes.
Yes. No problem. Does public service loan forgiveness include graduate school loans?
Yes.
Can a full-time fellowship count if it's at a nonprofit?
If they're paying you, yes.
So if you're getting that W-2 back, it should count. Yep, okay. For auto credits, are you prioritizing the application submitted? For auto credits, are you prioritizing the application submitted, or for those borrowers that credit would lead to full forgiveness being processed first? So are you guys prioritizing applications as you receive them?
I mean, I don't really know how to answer that, but what I'll say is we process discharge files every 2 weeks. We process proxy payment files, or like the updated file counts, every month. So we're just doing everything like continuously. So just get your stuff in.
Okay. Do payments made under garnishments count toward your 120?
No.
Again, guys, we have to keep this towards the public service loan forgiveness. I'm seeing some additional debt forgiveness questions. And I know the Department of Ed is working through updating the document. So we'll see that document in October. So if we could just keep the questions to the public service loan forgiveness portion. Let's scroll back up to the top. Maybe we missed some from the earlier portion. We'll do about 2 more minutes of questions. And I think we have another update from the Kresge Foundation's HR department. If we are already in the public service loan program and believe payments that did not previously qualify should qualify, how should we go about issuing agreements or contesting that?
So if you haven't got some of your credit, so first give it time. Maybe it just hasn't caught up yet, right? So once all is said and done, if something is still wrong with your account, we have a reconsideration process that you'll be able to use and have someone look at your account. We also have a really great ombudsman who will look at your account. So there are going to be a bunch of pathways to getting that looked at, but give it time because it just hasn't caught up yet.
Okay. Is there a time limit on how far you can go back in your employment?
October 2007.
Okay. I believe I'm gonna make this the last question. Bill, did you have a question? I have 2 eligible employers and 1 likely not eligible employer. In that case, do I need to submit 2 different forms?
Yes. Each employer gets its own form, but like you'll go in the help tool, you'll put it all in at once and it'll generate all the forms at once. But every employer is going to have its own form and you have to get that signed and you have to sign it.
Okay. Is there a detriment to signing up for public service loan forgiveness right now? And I'll make that the last question.
I really don't see one. I mean, the only detriments could be, right, like we have a lot of forgiveness. Like if you like that, we've had people ask about like borrower defense versus PSLF if they went to one of the schools that has that's going to get borrower defense relief. So if you get for borrower defense, you get like refunds of all the monies you paid for that school. For PSLF, you would just get any excess refunds over 120. So for those borrowers, it could make sense. And if we discharge it for PSLF, like then, and you later do your BD claim, we can't like undo it. So that's the only reason. But in general, I don't think there's any downside to just getting the form in. I really, really don't.
All right. Well, thank you for that sort of rapid fire. There are a lot of really great questions in the chat. I would encourage everyone to definitely look at the resources listed on the screen, the updated FAQs. We will send the webinar out to everyone who registered, as well as shared on the Kresge YouTube page as early as tomorrow. And now I believe we have a message from the Kresge team.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Heather Hacker from the HR department at the Kresge Foundation. I just wanted to say a little bit about from kind of the employer standpoint. So if you are at an employer that may have to complete these for your staff, just a couple of quick kind of recommendations or things that have worked well for us. One, let those people know that may need to be completing them, that this is a very quick turnaround deadline. We only have till October 31st. And so if you can dedicate someone and let those staff members know that this is something that could be coming through. The form is not very long. It doesn't take very long to complete. And so if you can, let the people know that have to complete them, that they should be coming through and try to prioritize that and then get it back to staff within, 24 to 48 hours if possible, so that they can continue with their application, so they can kind of meet that October 31st deadline. Additionally, if you have a secondary or backup person in case that person is out of the office, that would be helpful for staff also. And really, that's it.
Thank you, Heather.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Heather for letting us know how you've been working on this here at Kresge. And I'd also like to thank all of today's speakers, Heather Hacker, Tracy Pearson, and of course, Ashley Harrington for joining us today and sharing their experiences with PSLF. I'd also like to thank our Kresge colleagues, Eugene Safton, Krista Yonke, and Ashley Johnson, and all of our colleagues in the IT office, the Kresge Executive Office, and the Department of Education for their support of this critically important outreach. If you're looking for additional resources, we hope to post this webinar on YouTube, as we said earlier, and ask all of you to encourage colleagues, friends, partners, grantees, family, to see if they might qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Kresge has also made a grant to Young Invincibles, a nonprofit, to get the word out about PSLF. And you can visit federalstudentaid.gov to learn more, in addition to some of the links that are in the chat. What struck me most about this really was when Ashley said, everyone can benefit if they're in public service and they have federal student loans. So just go out there, check it out, apply. The worst that will happen is you'll get denied, but you'll be better off if you don't get denied than you are today. And it could make a real difference in your ability to care for your family and save for your future. And just, it's a great opportunity. It is a promise that was made 15 years ago, and it is a promise that is finally being kept. So just apply. The deadline's Halloween. You have 47 days. Don't wait. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.